Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Week in Review with Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Thanks for joining me again, Daniel.
Thank you, Jay, for having me back.
Always good to talk to you, and there are always so many things at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity website to talk about, but I'd like to focus on three articles in particular. One has to do with Greece. You know, I always thought that Greece was the problems that Greece is having was their own fault, that they're basically a bunch of beach bums that laid around and drank and enjoyed the sun and did little else.
You're making it sound pretty fun.
It sounds like fun, but in fact, an article there I want you to talk about in a minute or two about what really has gotten Greece into trouble was really an eye-opener for me. A second article I'd like to ask you about has to do with Hilary Clinton, and it was written by Judge Napolitano. That has to do with Hillary arming terrorists and then lying to Congress about that. Very serious allegation for a person that might have a pretty good chance of becoming our next president, or whatever you want to call that office. And the third topic I'd like to ask you about is something that you wrote about, moderate rebels that we've been looking for. Congress has allocated $500 million to train moderate rebels, and I'd like you to talk about what we're getting for our money on that. Actually, let's start out with that article, Daniel.
Okay.
You titled it, "Guess How Many Moderate," in quotes, "Syrian rebels have been trained with Congress's $500 million."
Well, you know, as I start the article, it's not a trick question. The answer is zero.
Zero. Oh, wow.
Last June, the president came to Congress and said, "Hey, I need $500 million. I need to train some moderate rebels over there in Syria. We've been supporting this regime change now since 2011, and Assad was supposed to fall any day, and he hasn't. So I need some more money. I'm going to train some people. My advisors tell me that we're going to have 5,400 U.S. trained and armed fighters after the first year, and we're going to finally get this thing done." That was last May, and now this is June, over a year later, and of that 5,400 they promised us that would be already on the ground fighting, there are less than 100 who are actually even in the program, and of those, not a single person has completed the course. So from 5,400 promised, we have zero. Now they're promising us that there'll be 3,000 by the end of the year, but nobody believes that because literally nobody is showing up at the recruiting station, and anybody who does is quite quickly ushered to the door because they're clearly not moderates.
Yeah, one wonders who is moderate these days.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess, you know, just a little bit of simple mathematics tells me that our cost is infinite so far per soldier, per rebel. I mean, if we got one of them, it would be a very high cost. But now you can't even do the math because there's nobody's in the program yet. So. And
this is how these things always go. They promise us it's going to be a cakewalk. They promise us this is going to work great. This is going to be just like the wonderful surge in Iraq, which itself wasn't that awfully good. It's going to be fantastic. Just give us the money. You get all of these think tank types that'll sit down before a congressional committee, and with all of their fancy experience, nobody asks them if they've ever gotten anything right yet. They just listen to them in rapt attention and all of these great plans, and they never come through. They always fall by the wayside, you know.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I pointed out in this little commentary is that there's a kind of a dual track program because the CIA has its own program, and they don't really have to worry about PR because theirs is all covert and classified.
Yeah.
But it has been documented that the people that they train and arm are fighting side by side with Al Qaeda and in Syria. So they don't really have the qualms. As a matter of fact, Congress, believe it or not, was so concerned about these CIA-funded rebels actually taking over in Syria when they're done fighting that they cut the CIA program, funding for the program, I think by $1 billion, because they looked around at what they've been spending money on for 3 years and realized, oh no, ISIS is going to take over.
Jeez.
So now you tell us.
It's incredible. They're supposed to be our enemies. That's what they've got Americans believing, that we're over there fighting. That's why we're spending all that money, $500 million, $500 million to train these guys, moderates. and nothing comes of it, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to raise any issues about it. Very, very few people, Daniel. So
I was just going to say, it's kind of a cliche, but it reminds you of 1984, of Orwell's 1984. And everybody knows we're at war with East Asia. Yeah. Everybody knows we're at war, with Eurasia. It just changes overnight. Everybody knows that Al Qaeda is our ally. As a matter of fact, Dr. Paul and I did a segment of the show this week, and I also mentioned it in this article that the neocons have been really busy lately writing a bunch of articles and a lot of commentary saying we really need to rethink our relationship with Al Qaeda. They're not as bad as we thought, guys.
Oh, my goodness.
They're the enemy of our enemy, so we need to kind of hold our nose and stop being so paranoid about these guys. So there they go.
If the American people just would stop and listen to what's going on, they would be incredibly incensed, I think. But they don't stop to even think about it, and if they listen to the mainstream media, they're never going to know about it. So,
well, they're told they're unpatriotic if they question this foreign policy.
Right.
That we've got to be the muscular leaders of the world, telling the rest of the world what to do. And sadly, as Americans are doing worse off financially and economically, people are really hurting with the economy. Look at the people who even dropped off the ranks of the employed.
Oh,
they don't even get counted anymore. Meanwhile, they'll hand them a flag and turn on Fox News for them, and all is good. We're pushing the world around.
Yeah. Well, it's the big lie is accepted if it's told often enough. People start to believe it, I guess, and we're looking for the truth, Daniel, and we can't just go with the majority. I think we have to look objectively at the truth, and let's go to the next story, which is Judge Napolitano, talking about Hilary Clinton's arming the terrorists and then lying to Congress about what she's up to. What's the judge talking about here?
Yeah, I think this is a huge story, and as you know, we're so grateful that Judge Napolitano is one of our advisory board members. So he's such a terrific guy, and we love putting his articles and his video appearances up on the Institute site so people can be more aware of the great work that he does. But he did a great piece where he took a good look at the emails, the latest email release that the State Department did on Hillary Clinton's emails. And my colleague Adam Dick wrote this piece up. But Napolitano concluded reading the emails, and this is chilling if you listen, just quote of what Napolitano said. He said, "What I saw has persuaded me beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty that Clinton provided material assistance to terrorists and lied to Congress in a venue where the law required her to be truthful."
Wow.
That's pretty heavy-duty stuff. And what the judge was saying was that they knew that weapons were being sold and given to rebels in both Libya and Syria who were on the terrorist watch list. They were classified as terrorists by the U.S. government. That means it would be illegal under U.S. law for them to be given weapons. So what Hillary's State Department did is they just routed them through Qatar and then sent them on to the rebels after that. So this reminds me, in sort of a general sense, of the Iran-Contra scandal, doesn't it, Jay?
Yeah, sure. It sounds just like it almost.
Yes.
I have to wonder also, what has hit the news, of course, has been the Clinton, what's it called, the Clinton Global Initiative, or
yes,
his organization, that has taken money from all manner of countries. Is this something you think this issue that the judge just raised might come up in the campaign?
I would hope that it would. I think this is pretty serious, and I can imagine all of the people around Hillary Clinton at the time, all of the people like Samantha Power and so many others in the administration who have no qualms about using extreme force when they think it's a humanitarian intervention, And then if you look at what Libya is like today, if you look at what Syria is like today, when so many millions of people are suffering because of U.S. interventionist policy, how disgusting for these people to dare to call themselves humanitarians. It's just repulsive.
Repulsive, and it's a con job.
Yeah.
It's incredibly evil, it seems to me. I don't know how you can see it any other way. All right, moving on to the next topic. And this was really an eye-opener for me, Daniel. You brought it to my attention. We're all hearing about the Greeks, and the Greeks are, deadbeats, and they just lay around and enjoy the sun and the water and they don't work and they're lazy, and that's why they're in such trouble. Not exactly the case, and the headline here: Greek crisis awaits other NATO partners. And this article talks about how Greece has been convinced to spend a huge amount of money relative to its GDP, relative to other countries, relative to Western European countries especially, in terms of its GDP. Talk to us a little bit about the content of this article, because I think this is really important as the world is sitting on edge this weekend, worrying and thinking about what's going to happen to the global financial markets as a result of Greece's financial problems. They are hopelessly in debt, cannot repay that debt unless they get some kind of major forgiveness, and the markets are concerned that it could start triggering, domino-like effect in the financial markets, and it is something I think that I'm concerned about. But talk to us a little bit give us a story about how did Greece get sucked into spending so much money on its military?
Yeah, I was the same way as you, Jay. I had sort of vaguely known that Greece spent a lot of money on the military, but I hadn't really put two and two together until I read this excellent article by Finney and Cunningham that we put up on the Institute site today, actually. And it really brings to the forefront a key component of Greece's financial problem that we hadn't thought of, but that is that Greece has spent, for the last at least 15 years, has spent an enormous amount of its GDP on defense, on military spending. I think one year in 2010 they were spending 7% of GDP on the military.
Wow.
And the article talks about, of the $320 billion that Greek has as a debt burden, some estimate that about almost half of that is due to military spending.
Wow.
So that is enormous, and he talks about how the beneficiaries in Washington, in Berlin, in Paris are the extremely well-connected military-industrial complex who pushes on to Greece the idea that it has so many enemies, it should be worried about the Turks, it's got to buy more stuff, it's got to buy more weapons, and Greek has stupidly followed along with this and spent this money, and now they are in a huge mess.
Yeah, for sure. I was just looking over some of these numbers that are in this report. It seems as though the Western European countries, Daniel, are spending less relative to their GDP than Greece.
Yeah, actually, I wrote a little article about that this week, and I sort of contrasted all of the fiery rhetoric coming out of especially the UK, but certain other governments in West Europe about this huge Russian threat and how they're about to invade. And I contrasted it with the shrinking defense budgets. Maybe we talked about this last week, Jay, but contrasted it with the shrinking defense budgets and said, what country in its right mind, if it felt like it was truly facing an invasion, would cut its military spending?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. So they know what's going on. I mean, Germany spends I think 1.2% of its GDP on defense, and it's gone down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The only countries, and this is kind of the point of the article in a way, but the point of the article is, while Western Europe is reducing its military spending with very few exceptions, the Baltic countries that are the new NATO members are in some cases radically expanding. Lithuania increased its defense spending by 50% this past year.
Wow.
So they are, I think they're being pushed by NATO to spend this stuff. It's almost like they're falling under the influence of the bad kids at school.
Well, and you point out, or the author points out in the article, that those expenditures are heading towards Greece and France and I suppose the United States as well. So the military-industrial complex rakes in the dough, makes a lot of money, and gets these poor people of Greece to pay for it. Turkey is supposedly a big threat for Greece, and that's part of the story. I don't know what you think about that. What's the?
Well, they're both NATO members. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
If Article 5 of the NATO Alliance Treaty means anything, it's a completely moot point. There's no way one NATO member could invade another NATO member. It's just an impossibility.
Well, that's really stupid then. I mean, the Greek people are really stupid, or somebody did or somebody, how do you account for that? Why would the Greek?
Well,
If they're part of NATO, that should be one of the benefits of being a part of NATO, giving up some of your sovereignty. You ought to at least be protected against each other. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's one of the ideas.
least, exactly. But
Yeah.
I bet if you looked into how much graft and corruption Greek politicians on one side and the greedy, corrupt military-industrial complex on the other side, you can imagine how much of that money ended up in people's pockets.
It goes on and on and on, Daniel. Every week we talk about things like this, and I guess, really, we just have to sort of examine our own hearts and minds and souls, and and try to do the right thing. I think that those of us who are God-fearing people somehow should see that something isn't right here, that this isn't the way we should be treating our fellow man. But in any event, thank you very much, Daniel, for passing along your insights. Anything else you'd like to add, and what should we keep our eyes on next week?
Well, I think I'm fascinated by what's happening in Greece. I'm not super optimistic that not that it's any of my business, but I don't think that the current Greek government wants out of the EU. I don't think they want out of the euro, and I think they're desperate to cut a deal because they want to stay in the club. I also think that the rest of the world is going to put the screws in. But you know this better than I do, Jay, but what I've been watching in fascination is what looks like the implosion of the Chinese stock market.
Oh,
so
yes.
As maybe a correlation of the Greek problem. But that's what's got me fascinated. Who knows what's going to happen next
You're
week.
so right about that, Daniel. I mean, we've seen a decline in Chinese stocks over this last week in Shenzhen and Shanghai. Amazing. So, yeah, it's becoming an increasingly unstable world. And I don't know if it's by design or not. The conspiracy folks say it is. I don't know. Richard Mayberry, who I've had on my show, thinks it's just really not conspiratorial, but it's just a lot of people acting in their own selfish interest and not caring about moral issues, what's right and wrong. So the military-industrial complex, if they can con the Greeks into buying more weapons, okay, good. Then their bottom line improves, and they have more profits, and their stock prices go up, and they can expand their own little empires. So I don't know. It's it doesn't, it's out of check. And of course, as as your boss knows so well and talks about, if only we had an honest monetary system, it would really cure an awful lot of this excessive spending. Because as long as people don't really understand that they're paying for things, then they don't object to it so much. But if people really understood that all of these military escapades are going to cost the common folks, that's who always ends up paying in Greece or wherever it is. All of us average folks that are working hard and playing by the rules and trying to do what's right end up getting squeezed. But in any event, thanks again, Daniel, for helping us understand a few of these major issues, and we'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Thank you, Jay.